I'm your host, Kinetic, and you're watching GameOnEnd. Hello, welcome to our add-on series. Today we're continuing our look at Trade Skill Master. Let's start with the mailbox. Alright, so we are first pulling out our expired auctions. Got a lot of our cloth back. And our enchanting materials. But we did have some sales of clam meat and a little bit of strange dust. So we'll pull that out. Okay, so we've got a few sales here. Alright, so previously we've taken a look at creating our own groups, creating our own pricing for items and how we want to sell that. So today we're going to take a look at a couple of more advanced things. The first being a custom price. Now, type /TSM to get into the options here. Now, as we can see on this first screen here, we have custom price sources. Now, we don't have anything loaded in here yet, but custom price sources are a simple way to get a formula into your pricing without having to type that formula every time. So we can take a look here at some of our prices that we have in here, right? And most of these are just simple things. It's not a big deal to retype these or to copy paste these into into new operations. But when you start building this out and start having a pretty full featured list of operations, copying and pasting and things like that can start taking a lot of time, much less when you start getting some much more advanced formulas here. Now, in most cases, you don't need anything too advanced. These kind of sources for your pricing work just fine, but in some instances, you do want a little bit more advanced math. So we can get into things like referencing multiple prices. And a good place to start with that is with an advanced function called the check function. Now, what check does, to put it simply, is has three fields. So let's jump back and make a new operation here. We will call this a we'll call this check test. Okay, and we're going to go ahead and match stack size, and let's say this is something we want to sell in stacks of 1 and 1 auction at a time, and we can go in with something simple. So what the check function does is it says check, and then we can put 3 values separated by commas. And all this does is tells us to check if A is a positive number or not invalid, then do B. And if this is a negative number or below 0, then do C. Now, how does that make sense? So let's put this into simpler things. We have a value here, and we have if that value is positive and if it is negative. Then we will do either of these things. So let's start with a value. We can say something like DB market, and that would work. We can put in a simple thing, and all that would say is that if this returns a value, if the item that we're looking for has a current market price that shows up in our pricing data, then if that price is a positive number, which if there is any market value for an item, then it would show up as a positive number. So then we would say, okay, what do we want to post for? This is the positive. And if there is no DB market value, as in this item hasn't been listed on the auction house for the last 14 days or something like that, then that would show up as an invalid number, which would also report as negative, and so then it would go to this value here. So how could we use something like that? Well, we could say if there is a market price, that's a positive, and we would say, okay, well then use that price. But if it's a negative or invalid, then we need to tell it what to do in that case. Well, we can say, okay, post it for 120% of vendors sell. So in that case, if there is no market value to this item, then we'll just reference what it would sell to a vendor for. Something similar is that we could have it check for this price, and if this price is invalid or is below 0, then we could go with the DB region market average. And in that case, what it says is, well, if there is a market value, our local server's pricing, then just go with the value on our local server. And if there is no local server value, then go with the value of this item in our region, and in my case would be the US. So the check function is pretty cool in that it gives you a way to validate pricing. Now, in most cases, there's always going to be a market pricing for an item. But when you start getting into higher value items or rare items, such as like very rare transmog items or TCG mounts or pets or certain less frequent items, there just may not be any point of reference on your server. Somebody may not have had that item for sale in the last 14 days or 60 days or so forth, and you may need to reference another price source to get a valid price. You can also swap this out for if there is no 14-day pricing, the DB market, then you can go to historical, which would be a 60-day pricing. So you could say, well, if this item hasn't been sold in the last 14 days, then how do we get our price? Well, let's look back 60 days and see if that's there. So you can really get into some interesting territory here with the check function, and don't have to be limited to just single price sources here. You can also start adding in some math. So we can say something like, if the market value minus 100 gold So what that would tell us is if this price, the market value of this item, minus 100 gold is a positive, then let's go with the market value. Otherwise, we could go with just 100 gold. So in this case, what it would say is if the item we're trying to sell, let's say a transmog item or something like that, let's say we don't want to sell this for less than 100 gold. We don't want to sell anything transmog related for less than 100 gold. Well, we could assign this operation to a group of just transmog items, and what this would say is that our lowest price is market value minus 100 gold. So what that says is, let's say we have an item that typically that the market price for it is 80 gold. Well, that will come up with a negative. So we don't want to sell it for the market value. We're just going to default to 100 gold being our minimum price. That way we never post for less than 100 gold. And we can then decide what we do when somebody has this item up for that market value of 80 gold. Well, we can either just not post the item, or we can say ignore auctions below, as we've talked about before, and then if there is an item up for 80 gold and another of this item up for 120 gold, well, we would just undercut that 120 gold one and ignore the 80 gold one and just hope that somebody buys that one up quickly. Or we can just say post at our minimum price here. So in that scenario, we would ignore the 80 gold and ignore the 120 gold because it's over our minimum price. We would just post at our minimum price, which is this 100 gold. So there's a lot of options that we can do here with getting into math. Let's take another example of comparing our market price to the region price, in which case we can say if our local market price, our server price, minus the region average price. So we could say basically if our local server an item tends to sell for 200 gold, but the region-wide average for that is only 100 gold, well, then we would say, okay, if 200, our market value, minus 100, the region market value, right? We're basically, if you replace these with numbers, it's easy to follow the check function here. So we're saying if our local server price is 200 gold, but the region average is 100 gold, well, then 200 minus 100 would be a positive, which would then go to this price. And if 200, if we swap these values, if our local market price is only 100, but on average the region market price is 200, then that would be a negative, right? 100 minus 200 would be a negative. So we would go to this, in which case we would say 100 minus 200 would be a negative, so we would not go to this, we would go to this. So in this case, if our market price is too much lower than the region average, then we want to use the region average price instead of the market price. So if we follow the goal of the check function is to basically ensure that one thing never falls below a certain threshold, and we decide that threshold all in this first field, in the A field, right? So we would have the A field, and then we have positive and negative. So how do these things apply to custom pricing? Well, if we start getting into some more advanced math here, we don't really want to have to keep typing this out for further operations. What we can do is create a custom price that includes that math. Now you can put anything you want in here, and one thing to note is that you do need to reload your UI after creating a custom price source. So let's create a custom price source here for transmog. Now you can name this anything you want, but as you can see here, it can only contain letters. There can't be spaces, numbers, or special characters. So the name gives us the wording that we're going to type in the price. So as we've seen before, we have options such as average sell, or vendor sell, or DB market. This now adds in a new word that we can load in this case, the word being transmog, and the price for this source is what this word means. So in the case of the pricing source vendor sell, well, what that math is the price that that item sells to a vendor for. The price source DB market references what the average of the last 14 days of that item is, leaning a little heavier towards the last 3 days. So we have all these existing price sources that come stock with Trade Skill Master, but we can create our own price source. So in this case, let's try the check function. So again, we have A, which is our math, which tells us what we want to reference. We have B, which is the positive, and we have C, which is the negative. Let's just create ourselves a little reference check of the region market pricing versus our local server pricing. So we can use some math here. Let's put in brackets here. If, let's say, we want to ensure that our market price doesn't go more than 90% below the region market pricing. We can do that here by saying if 0.9, which is 90%, times the DB market price, that would give us 90% of the market price. If that price minus the region market average, so what we're saying here is if 90% of the market price minus the region market average is a positive, then we're okay with going with the market price. And if not, then let's go to that region average. So what this is saying, let's put this into numbers, right? So if, let's say the local server price is 100 gold, but on average the region price is 200 gold. Well, let's put this into numbers and do this math. If this is 100 gold and this is 200 gold, then what happens? Well, 90% of 100 is 90. So we have what amounts to 90 gold minus 200 gold. Well, if that's a positive, then we do the first, and if it's a negative, then we do the second. So what we're saying is, in this instance, it would be a negative, so we would go with our price of 200 gold here. So if we have this custom price source applied to a group of transmog items, when this source applies itself to a given item, if that item's local server price, if that item normally sells on our server for 100 gold, but on average across the US it sells for 200 gold, well, in that case we're gonna go with 200 gold being the price that we would like to get for that. But let's swap these numbers. Right? If we say that the local server price typically is 200 gold, but on average across the region it sells for 100 gold, then what happens? Okay, 0.9 of 200 is 180 minus 100. That would give us a positive, so we go to B, which means that we would go with this 200 value and it would not come up negative, so we would ignore the negative. This gives us a way to give a little bit of balance to our pricing, in that we can make sure that things don't fall below certain thresholds. Now, you can get even more advanced with this by putting more things into here. Let's go with something a little bit more advanced. We would like to ensure that the market price. Now, the way I like to create formulas is by just entering in the values that I need to reference first, and then figure out the correct order to put them in. And if you just can in your head, or you can even write this out like in a notepad or something like that, by writing out a formula and then replacing it with numbers as examples, as we just have done, then that gives you an easy way to see if your formula works correctly. So let's say we want to reference the price that we can sell something to a vendor for. We want the market price, and now let's replace these back with positive and negative. So we want to reference the vendor sell, the market price, and our average buy. Okay, these are the three sources, let's say, that we would possibly have as pricing. If we just, let's say with a transmog item, we would have gotten this three ways. We've either just picked this up as loot off of a mob, in which case there is no price source for that. It was free to us. We picked it up. We looted it off of a mob. So in that case, we just don't want to sell it for less than we could sell it to a vendor for, right? Because there's no point in that. The auction house is going to take a 5% cut. We may as well just sell it to a vendor. So we have 105% a vendor sell. That would cover in the price that we could get from a vendor plus the auction house cut, let's say. we have that price. We have just the market price, which is the value of that item in our current server's market. And then let's say we've found an item that we think is very cheap to purchase and to flip. Well, then we would have our buy price, as we've referenced before. And then as one other thing we can reference the region pricing for this item. Now, this may seem complicated, but all we're basically saying is that we just want to look for these numbers. So far, that's all we've checked. Now, how does it know which number to use? We've got 4 price sources here. So how do we know which one of these to use? Well, we could go with a option like maximum. So we're all within the first comma here. This is all just our math. So in this case, this would basically just go with, well, which number is the highest here? So we basically have covered ourselves here. We'll never sell below than we've paid for it, or than it will go to a vendor for. We could just get rid of check and this would work. We're basically just saying, well, our maximum of these values, and that would still be fine as a custom price source. What if we move the check function into here? Okay, so we need brackets for the check function, and let's say we want to move these prices into here. Now follow with me here as we do a little bit of what we did before. So what we have here basically protects us from the region price shooting up, because in that instance we would basically stick with our local market pricing. But it also protects us against our market price going crazy, because if the region market price is more than 90% lower than our local server's price, we're just going to default to that region market price. In most cases, something like this would be fine. It basically gives us a protection from either market going too far over the other market, and of course you can decide what margins you want to go with here, but 90% usually seems pretty safe. It keeps numbers within a pretty tight range, without them going too far out of control. We now have a large check here, which is basically saying that this price source called transmog is looking for whichever is the highest number here. But what it protects us from is either the region value or the local server value going too far out of a certain range. So if we just had these two values in here in the max check, then in that instance where either the market or the region average shoot up to say 1,000 gold or something, of course that would be the max, that would be the highest value out of all these things. But because we've put this check in, we've now protected ourselves against this one oddball spiked price. We now have whichever is the kind of the sane price of these two, if you want to put it that way. So then you basically save that, and then you do a reload, and that will now be saved as a custom price. Okay, so how do we use this? Well, let's go back into the menu. We'll see that we now have this as a custom price source. And we can use this just like any other price source. So we can load this in. We can use this in a function just like anything else. Like if we were looking for, you know, the maximum of 2 prices. You can really get creative with these custom prices in any way you like. You can come up with any kind of math function that you want to be able to use in another thing without these getting super long, super crazy. It's kind of a cool thing in that you can make up the building blocks. If you think of custom prices like building blocks, you can use these building blocks in any way that suits the kind of math that you want to do, without having to, in this one line, you know, type out some pretty long equations or, you know, or formula. You can build in the building blocks into custom prices. So if, say, you wanted to just build a custom price that was always validating, you know, that check of that the region, you know, or market are not too far off from each other, you could build that into a custom price, and then anytime you want to use that as a thing, you can just build that in, and not have to think about the math of that. You just know that this word stands for a thing. So we can go ahead and test this out. Now, in this case, obviously we don't want to do this because this will give us an invalid price in that our normal price is actually lower than our minimum. So let's just go to 105%. And now let's see what happens. Go to our selling tab and start a scan here. Okay, so let's take a look at the pricing. So these are all normal pricing. Okay, so this is for the simple branch of the owl. It's suggesting the price of 46 gold. So let's see what this is. The market value of this is 42 gold. That's our local server price. And the region market average is 44 gold. So we are basically going at that 105%, which is fine. All right, great. So as you can see, it gives us a nice, easy way to do some math repeatedly throughout things without having to keep copy pasting or manually adjusting these things, even to the degree that you can simply just have that equation, and then in different items you can get different values for that. So if you had an operation to sell normal BOE items, you can have these be the numbers. Let's say we want to make a new operation for our much cheaper BOE items, and we would like to maybe tighten up these numbers to to 110% or whatever. you can play with these things while still having all the same math. It'll still give you the same root number, and then you can just simply adjust this whole thing with just a simple percentage here, and then have that applied to to different groups. Now, do you need to do that in those cases? Maybe not, but let's take a look at something where maybe we could do that. So let's come back to our custom prices. Let's do something for our reagents. Just for the example, let's say we want to come up with a simple weighting, and let's say that we want to lean towards our market pricing, but we still want some kind of reference towards the region pricing for these items. We can take this value and add it to this value. Now, the reason that we're putting a 1 in here, because this would just be this number, but the reason that we're doing this is so that if down the road we decide we want to change this weighting, we could do 5 and 2. You can do this any way you like, but if you take this number and then divide it by 4, what we're now saying is that basically we want to weight our local market price 3 times the weight of the region market price. If this item, if it's worth 10 gold here in the market on our server, but it's worth 20 gold, in the region, well, we don't have to simply go with, either 10 gold or 20 gold. We're now coming up with a number that kind of splits the difference, but in a way that's weighted heavier towards the market. So let's put this into numbers to make sense. So if our market's price is 10 gold, then this number is 30. And 1 times 20, if the region is 20 gold, then that's 20. So we have 30 plus 20 equals 50 divided by 4, which is a little over 10. So we would lean heavily towards that 10 gold price, but we would go up a little bit because we see that the region price is a little bit higher. So let's save that. And again, we do a reload UI so that that value saves. Now let's go back into Trade Skill Master. Go to our operations. In both of these that we're using to post, right now we are just referencing the region average. So we can now replace this with our new math. And this will basically do that math for us. So instead of having to type out that formula that we had every time, we can do this. Now, why is this beneficial? It doesn't necessarily take too long to go in and copy paste and do all that stuff. Well, the reason why it's beneficial is because you can now adjust your weighting anytime you like for all of the operations that use that price. So if we had that formula of the 3 times the market versus 1 time the region market price, if let's say we decided we wanted to change this weighting, Well, with this as a custom price, we simply change numbers in here, save that, do a reload, and now, even if we have 10 different operations that reference that price, they all have now just instantly updated to the new weighting that we've decided. Whereas in the manual version of doing this, we would have to go back here and change that 3 and the 1, and then go to here and change the 3 and the 1 in every field. So if we were using that as the pricing here, we would have to change it here. We would have to change it here. We'd have to come in, change it here, right? And so on and so forth. You would have to also remember which operations use that formula that you created. And you'd have to maintain all of that. So the awesome part of custom pricing is that you can make tweaks to your pricing quickly and easily, and automatically everything else that uses that pricing updates. So we've now, with one quick little change to the custom pricing here and a reload, we now have updated all of those operations that use that price. So let's go ahead and take a look here. We're going to go ahead and do a quick buy search here before we get posting. Right, so let's go grab these items. And let's get them back up. That will do it for this episode. If you've enjoyed this, remember, pressing the like button is absolutely free. Subscribe and stay tuned for more Game On End.